3/4 of the university's students are white, and now the school is putting the question directly to students in a questionnaire. How do we make sure that in future years we're not as white as we are today?
If in the decades ahead we are as white as we are today, we will have failed as a university.
Still, and there's a whole generation, I say this, I said this, for apartheid South Africa, I said this for my own, community in the South. There are still generations of people, older people, who were born and bred and marinated in it, in that prejudice and racism, and they just have to die.
We won't be airing images of the whiteboard message casting a dark shadow today on Butler Pride.
Our university was founded on principles of diversity and inclusion.
But you can find pictures on practically any social media platform. It's been shared widely by students and alumni who say they're offended.
It was written in marker on a dry erase board, and the words white power were written prominently at the top of the board.
He promptly took to Twitter to join the voices condemning hate.
This is not okay.
But the Force received complaints that his online activity was deeply offensive to the transgender community.
Harry Miller's Twitter activity included liking a tweet of a limerick that appeared to mock transgender women.
But notice this kid in the front row. He appears to be making the white power sign.
They're just trying to attack a bunch of survivors of a school shooting. And when they realize it, it kind of scares them. Like, you can disagree with an assault weapons ban, you can disagree with numbers and facts that we give, but at the end of the day, people are dying, and we're trying to stop that. And if you're against that, that's inhuman.
I don't know why they allow it. I mean, it's supposed to be free speech, but the things that are on social media are so disgusting that there has to be action taken by the people who own these companies, that run these companies, and say, enough's enough, we're spreading hate. We're spreading hate. And people say, well, what about my freedom of speech? Sod your freedom of speech.
Inequity also appears in the numbers. White students at the school scored an average of 33% higher than their black peers on standardized tests in 2016.
I think the truth is that racism and supremacy is no longer legal, so it kind of just happens behind closed doors.
There needs to be more talks, focus on trying to stop the institutionalized racism. And it's not only in the high school, you need to go back to the elementary school, back to the middle schools, because that's where those things can form.
I mean, we see conspiracy theories like the horrific slander directed against George Soros is a really good example. George Soros is patient zero for the anti-Semites. And what they've done is use social media to normalize this kind of hate.
Ian Walsh appears, as you might well say, the world's gone nuts, because I am standing here this morning outside of police headquarters because one of our guests on the show, later on Twitter, who has a boy who was a son who was born a boy, then transitioned to a girl, they were referred to the wrong pronoun as a he or a boy. That was the debate on Twitter. As a result of that, Susie Green said that she found this actually distressing and spiteful, made a complaint to Surrey Police, who now tell us that they are actually investigating as a hate crime. Hate crime have a maximum prison sentence of anything up to 2 years.
42 is passed.
Senate Democrats passed a bill to add Colorado to a multi-state pact, awarding our votes for president to whomever wins the national popular vote, saying it's about fairness.
Making sure the people, no matter where they happen to live, have an equal vote.
We are, last I checked, the legislature, and we do, under the United States Constitution, have an authority to determine whatever manner we would like.
Let's just be clear. As AI begins to become a much more important part, a much more integral part of our world, we need to understand that AI or artificial intelligence or these algorithms or these social media platforms are not devoid of biases, that they don't in fact carry forward, right, deep structural inequalities.
And what took so long?
The second question is easier to answer. It is absurd that it took this long. Last year, Motherboard reported on the fact that Facebook had banned white nationalist speech, white supremacy speech, I should say. It took over a year for them to agree, to meet with certain groups and agree that white nationalism and white separatism were the same as white supremacy. That's not the kind of conversation that should take a year. That's the kind of conversation that should take a phone call, maybe a day, maybe two. You talk to a couple of people who are historians in the subject, and they should tell you exactly that if you decide that you you don't want your platform to be an accelerant for white supremacy, you should also try to make sure that it is not accelerating explicit white nationalist and explicit white supremacist speech. So again, I think this is part of a formula that we have seen over and over again with Facebook, that Facebook says that the kind of company that moves fast and breaks things. But instead, we've seen a company that breaks things, gets caught, and then moves slowly to respond to the media reports that they are breaking things. They have to move faster, I think, if they're going to earn public trust as a public square for conversation.
What I do know is this, is that I think we need to ask some questions about who's in these rooms making the decisions. Who's in the room having these sorts of conversations? I suspect if those rooms were more diverse, Craig, if you had a number of folks with different viewpoints and positions, that Facebook would have come to this decision, would have came to this decision much earlier, and in some ways would have, I think, would have offered a kind of harsher judgment about these folks and their participation in the public domain. I understand that they're walking a tightrope with regards to their view of free speech, but we need to understand what hate speech does to the public square.
You know, it is very easy to be a privileged person and say, hey, everybody should just be treated fairly. I'm just for everybody being treated the same. It's more interesting, to be honest, it just makes you a more interesting person to say, what do I not know about the experience of being someone? I'm curious, how many African Americans did Noah interview for this book? Not philosophers, just regular people living their, and how did it challenge your reality, if at all?
You know, it's a shame that we're in this era where I gotta think twice about if I'm allowed to think something.
Right.
I don't believe that nigga was a hate crime. I don't believe that.
Right.
Sorry.
People are hired for firms, for companies. A social media review is not uncommon. I think the issue here is making bias and bigotry a part of the screen, right? So we do it with respect to if you have a criminal background, people will, notwithstanding a ban the box law, do a Google search to find out whether or not someone has a criminal record, as opposed to having a bigotry record. You know, if you can exclude whole categories of people based upon immutable characteristics, I don't think you can serve well on the team.
The one thing we don't require for a listing on our hate group list is violence. You know, we don't say a group has to be a violent group to be a hate group. It can be spewing hateful propaganda and not engaging in violence, and we would call it a hate group.
Police and school officials say the firestorm erupted over the weekend with a series of racist social media posts.
The superintendent says he hopes parents will monitor their kids' social media closer and help prevent these things from entering school grounds.
You know, a lot of advocacy groups have praised the move, but some people are saying Facebook should have done this a lot sooner.
This is certainly long overdue. If you look at how Facebook was manipulated, not just by Russia, but utilized by these white supremacist and white nationalist organizations over the years, there's a clear trend where they've really been, a safe ground for them. They've been able to organize effectively. The Charlottesville rally, in large part, was utilized there. They've normalized a lot of the rhetoric and a lot of the behavior of these groups, and they've spread hate, they've spread violence. And that's not what Facebook is about. It's not how the platform should be utilized.
But there are concerns that perhaps the users that support the spread of this ideology there will be an influx of them that will go to other networks.
Absolutely, and that's why it's on those other networks to start identifying these bad actors and removing them as well. Twitter has taken similar steps, although I'd argue they could go much further, especially in stopping the spread of fake news from both sides. Certainly, Reddit is a breeding ground for a lot of these groups and these individuals. Also, really, honestly, any platform like this that's a privately held company has a responsibility to its users to protect them from this kind of language, protect them from the spread of this kind of hate and this violence. They have they have an obligation to the country as well. I'm all for free speech, but on these platforms, it's not about free speech. It's about the user agreement that you consent to with that platform. And so Facebook has every right as a private company to do this, and so do these other social media platforms as well. And they should do that. They should take that into consideration.
We watch our president talk badly about globalists, the media, international banks, and we know what that's code for.
We're not going to wait for the White House. We're going to be working with state and local leaders, the business community, other nonprofits, and clergy. Richard, the bottom line is this. There are no two sides to this argument. It's good versus evil.
The abuse online can be far, far worse than anything physical.
Conspiracy theories that literally leap off the pages of white supremacist playbooks.
We would consider the Family Research Council a hate group. Some people might consider that controversial, but they consistently demonize the LGBT community, spread propaganda, demonizing propaganda about them, trying to link them to pedophilia, it's not just about gay marriage. Well, today, they may not be, killing people, but what they are doing is going to the White House and having an influence over public policy. So, that's a different form of danger. So we worry about both the hate mongers who wear, kind of white sheets and the hate mongers who wear business suits. They're both dangerous in different ways. The one thing we don't require for a listing on our hate group list is violence. We don't say a group has to be a violent group to be a hate group. It can be spewing hateful propaganda and not engaging in violence, and we would call it a hate group.
What we try to do here is publish information about these people, where they are, what groups they're involved in, what they're publishing.
We work with Google on using AI to try to interrupt cyber hate before it happens. We work with YouTube to get them to change their algorithms. We work with Facebook on trying to use a redirect method.
So once Pepe became a recognized hate symbol by the Anti-Defamation League, I reached out and was like, hey guys, I'm on the same team here. Like, I don't want this frog to be a hate symbol.
It's not really the extremists anymore that hate is being normalized, and that's what we need to worry about. But if hate is being normalized and normal people are participating in the Unite the Right marches and other marches and browsing the websites and going to the dark web or the not so dark web where a bunch of these hateful things are occurring, then some of those people or at least potentially fine people, normal people. So how do we think about whether or not hate is being normalized or whether we should still regard it as an extremist section of America that we ought to ostracize?
The system is set up really only to knock out the worst stuff. So Systrom says, that should be okay. That's not a violation of free speech. So what Instagram has done is they said, we're going to make a set of choices to try to elevate kindness and get rid of toxicity. We'll see what the other companies do next.
What's interesting? I find Instagram a safe place.
Well,
yeah.
It is.
It is. I like it.
That's what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
Let's be clear about this. As part of our policy, we do take race and ethnicity into account in building a diverse campus.
The Supreme Court has ruled repeatedly that race is an acceptable factor in college admissions.
We want our students to go out in the world and have an impact in a multicultural and diverse society. And to produce those kinds of students, we need to have a diverse student body on this campus.
But according to documents released this spring, admissions officers did discuss applicants in racial terms. No cultural flavor, reads one review of an Hispanic applicant. Very few African Americans with verbal scores like this, reads another.
But tonight, Harambe, no laughing matter at the state's largest university. A few RAs at UMass are actually banning Harambe jokes because some say they have racist implications.
In North Carolina, a high school history teacher was photographed stomping an American flag. Cornell University will now join Brown University in offering feminine hygiene products in men's restrooms. DePaul University, a Catholic school in Chicago, has banned pro-life posters that say unborn lives matter. A teacher at Norman North High School in Norman, Oklahoma told students, quote, "To be white is to be racist, period." The University of Wisconsin Lacrosse's official hate response team received reports from a student offended that there is a Christian cross on campus.